here. Yeah, we're just so excited to be here with you, and just thank you so much for making time on a Monday morning to join us for this webinar. So also earlier, we were just asking people in the audience whether they work with children or whether they have children themselves. And I know we have a number of parents in the audience, as well as people who might work with children or who are training to work with children. So we're really excited to have you here. But also, even if you are not a parent yet, or you don't currently work with children, I'm pretty sure all of us have children in our lives, whether they're nieces and nephews or little cousins. So I think it's a really relevant topic for anybody who knows a child. So the topic today that we're going to talk about is demystifying misbehavior. And I'm going to ask Carmen to come on and introduce herself in a little bit. But we just want to say thank you to Utah as well for hosting this event. Can everybody see my screen? If you do, and you've got your video on, just give me a thumbs up. Great, thank you so much. So demystifying misbehavior. Actually, before I go into that, I just wanted to say, I love seeing children misbehave. I love it when my 3-year-old is acting out, when she's on the floor throwing a tantrum, when she is yelling, when I see children hit each other. Like I love seeing that. It gives me a rush. And when I have to figure out how to discipline them, yeah, I really I love doing that. It's my favorite thing to do. I'm pretty sure that nobody feels like that. I don't feel like that. Yeah, that was super sarcastic. I don't enjoy watching children misbehave. I don't think anybody does. I don't think any parent or any teacher enjoys disciplining. It can feel really hard. It can get really uncomfortable. But it's also just a really natural part of childhood, right? It's part of being a child. It's part of growing up, learning what limits are and how to behave appropriately in social settings. So it's a hard topic, but it's also a really necessary one. And I just hope that some of what we share resonates and you'll find helpful. And really, this whole idea of how sometimes things get hard in parenting and figuring out how to discipline really lies behind why we started Raised with Wonder. So both Carmen and myself started Raised with Wonder very recently. And what we are is a community for parents, for educators, for caregivers, basically anybody who works with or cares for children, who are committed to raising children who are secure, who are resilient, and who are joyful. And our work focuses mainly on the toddler years, so children from about 1+ to 5. And that's simply because we found that many parents struggle to make that leap from, your cute, non-verbal, dependent baby to when they suddenly, almost overnight, become a walking, talking, independent toddler with a mind of their own. And that brings with it a whole new set of challenges. So that's the age group that we tend to focus on. But having said that, a lot of what we'll cover today will be applicable to children of various ages. So that's who we are as an organization. A little bit about myself. As Joyce said, I'm a mother, a teacher, and a parent guide, and I'm currently based in Ipoh. Although today, funnily enough, I actually ended up back in Ipoh because I had to rush back for something. And I spent most of my career as a management consultant and as a public policy researcher. So I really never thought I would end up working with children and with parents in this way. But when I became a mother myself 3 years ago, I was so overwhelmed and unprepared that I really felt the need to intentionally set out to understand my child. And that led me down a rabbit hole of wanting to understand the neuroscience and the theories of child development, and led me to a really big career switch to teaching 2 years ago. So I used to teach in a Reggio-inspired school in KL, and now I am a parent guide at Raised with Wonder. Carmen, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Justina. Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome. My name is Carmen, and I'm also a parent guide. Now, a fun fact, I know a lot of people here are UTAR students. I actually was a UTAR student myself. I did psychology in my bachelor's degree, and I actually was the first batch to be in the Kamba campus. So way back when there was no McDonald's, no cinema, our only entertainment was to go to Westlake, walk around Westlake, but it's so advanced now over there. Yeah, so I did psychology for my bachelor's degree in Utah, and I went on to do a master's in special education. And then I worked with children with special needs with autism for a couple of years. And for now, I've been working with children for 9 years already. And throughout the journey of working with children, I found that, not only do teachers need to be educated on how to handle children, to be with them, I found that the parents at home, they struggle as well. When I go to their houses, they'll tell me, "Teacher Carmen, my child is like this. How do I address this?" And so I went on a journey of educating myself in hopes to educate them. And I actually found respectful parenting, and I'm so happy that I did, because it really transformed the way I think about education, about child rearing. And so hopefully today I'll be able to share with you some of the things that I'm passionate about. And yeah, throughout this journey, I've learned some things, I've gained some experiences, and I'm hoping to use my knowledge and experiences to really help parents and educators to raise children who are resilient, who are secure, and who are joyful. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Carmen. Yeah, and actually both Carmen and myself are trained in respectful infant educaring, and it's more widely known as respectful parenting. So a lot of our work and a lot of what we talk about is inspired and draws on the work of all these respectful educators who came before us, but it also draws on the research and science that we've learned along the way. So hopefully it's helpful. Okay, so we're going to move into some of the juicy stuff that you're here for. But just before that, I wanted to kind of set the scene a little bit for what we're going to talk about. And if you would join me, I just want you to think about the last time your child misbehaved. And if you're not a parent and you're not a teacher who's working with children, then think about a time when you were a child and you did something wrong that you were disciplined for. And if you want, you can just close your eyes. Most of you have your cameras off, so nobody's watching you, nobody's looking at you. Just close your eyes and think back to that time when your child was really acting out, or when you were doing something and your parents came in. What did they do? What did you do with your child? What is your child doing in this moment? Maybe your toddler is having a full body meltdown on the floor because you said no dessert today. Maybe your 4-year-old hit somebody over the head in the playground because he wanted to turn on the slide. Maybe you did something like made a mess at home. So just notice how your body is reacting to this moment. Are you tensing up? If you are in the role of a parent, are you tensing up? How's your breathing? What are you thinking in this moment? Is this happening at home or is it in a public place? Are people watching you? What's your first reaction? What do you feel like you need to do for your child right now as your child is just completely losing it? And if you are imagining yourself as the child, what does your parents' face look like? What are they saying to you? Are they shouting? Are they saying that they will punish you? And what happened in the moments that led up to this incident? Do you know why? The reason for the misbehavior? I just want you to sit in that moment for a little while and just really, really, really imagine what's going through your mind or what's going through your child's mind. And now, if you can slowly come back from that moment, sometimes it can be quite, it can actually feel quite physically uncomfortable. It can feel uncomfortable in your body. It might make you start to think about things. It can be triggering to imagine those challenging moments. But I'd like you to come back from that now. And if you could, I would love it for you if you could just share one line in the chat. What do you think your child is thinking in that moment? Or if you were the child, what were you thinking in that moment? And I can share like a very recent one as I'm waiting for people to maybe share with us. If you're a parent, I don't think it's hard to think about the most recent incident. And what I'm thinking is, oh, I wonder what the grandparents are thinking of me as a parent. I'm so embarrassed. Do they think that I'm a bad mom? And I think that my child is picking up on my feelings. So I think that my daughter is thinking, oh, mommy looks really angry right now. She shouted at me. Herman, am I doing the right thing? Elijah, thank you for sharing. My child is confused. And if you're not comfortable with sharing, that's okay too. It's really the point of the exercise is really just to kind of get us into that mindset of imagining and putting ourselves into the place of the child, or even thinking about how we react sometimes as parents or as teachers. Tasha, why is mama so angry? What did I do wrong? That's what you think that your son is thinking. How do I know she has a son? I think this is Tasha, my friend, so that's how I know she has a son. I'm not a mind reader. Yeah, thanks for sharing. So it's my right. Why are you taking my rights away? Wow, that's a really powerful one. Okay. Yeah, so I think, we can only make a best guess, right? Or an assumption about what our child is thinking about or feeling in the moment. And really all the things that we'll talk about, they do point back to the fact that ultimately you can't control somebody's behavior, however much you want to. You can't control your child's behavior, however much you want to. The only person that we can control is ourselves, and hopefully some of the things that we'll talk about and some of the tools that we'll unpack will help with that part of, helping us to control our own behaviors and helping us to get into a regulated space. So thank you so much for doing that with us. The plan for today, what we'll cover, we're going to hear from Carmen first about what does the brain science actually tell us about misbehavior. So what lies underneath the behavior that we're actually observing. And in the second part, I will come back and I will talk to you about two really practical strategies that I hope you'll be able to actually start using straight away the next time you're with a child. And hopefully they're just practical tools that you can use in the day-to-day moments. And then hopefully we can leave a little bit of time at the end for some questions. We actually already received some questions from the registration forms, but throughout the session, if you have any questions that come up as we are talking, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. We'll make a note of it and we'll try to get to it at the end of the session. So that's what we're going to cover today. Yeah, and I'm going to pass the time over to Carmen now.
Yeah, all right, thank you, Justina. Okay, so we just really want to start off by exploring why children misbehave in the first place. Obviously, we want our children to behave, right? We want them to think before they act. We want them to think about other people's feelings. We want them to be in control of their emotions. We want them to be polite, right? These are all the beautiful things that we want our children to do. But that's not always the case, right? We often see them snatch toys, talk back, they throw tantrums, they lie, and the many things that you were thinking about just now during Justina's exercise, right? So we really want to explore why do they do that? And today I want to introduce to you the why behind misbehavior through the lens of brain science. So what does brain science tell us about misbehavior? So I want to introduce to you this concept of the upstairs and the downstairs brain. So it's actually introduced by Dr. Dan Siegel. He's a professor of psychiatry. And he basically said that the brain can be seen like a house. So like a house, if you have the downstairs part of the house and the upstairs part of the house, that's like our brain as well. And so if I were to show you the brain on my hand, this would be the brain. And if you see, I've got my thumb here and I've got my 4 fingers wrapped around my thumb, and that would be the brain. And so the upstairs brain would be my 4 fingers and then over here, and then my downstairs brain would be the thumb right down to here. And what the 4 fingers represent, the upstairs brain represent, is the cortex, and the prefrontal cortex. We also call it the thinking brain, and the upstairs brain is actually responsible for all the beautiful things that we want our children to have, like empathy, right? To be able to think of how other people feel and not laugh at other children when other children fall down to the ground, right? Empathy. The upstairs brain is also responsible for sound decision making. So making good choices, not eating that 10th piece of candy in a row, right? Decision making. Flexibility as well. The upstairs brain is in charge of how adjustable our children are. So when things go out of routine, when things don't go the way they want to, how flexible they are is important for children, right? So that's what the upstairs brain is in charge of as well. And it is also in charge of regulation. So regulation is just a fancy word that means control. How well they can control their emotions, how well they can control their body. So when they're angry, when they're sad, how can they control that? It's all part of the upstairs brain that's controlling and responsible for that, right? So great upstairs brain has many amazing functions. And we go on to the downstairs brain, which is from my thumb, which signifies the amygdala, down to the brain stem. And then obviously down here, we have the spinal cord, right? So the downstairs brain has its function as well. So mainly 3 things. The downstairs brain is in charge of instincts, basic functions, and strong emotions. So instincts. So for example, if a snake is slithering towards you, your instinct would be to run away, right? So that is your downstairs brain playing its role to keep you safe, running away from threat and danger, right? And basic function is also a responsibility of the downstairs brain, where it controls things that don't really need your conscious thinking in your body, such as breathing and blinking your eyes and your heart pumping. Those are automatic things that your downstairs brain is responsible for. And it's also responsible for strong emotions. So maybe some strong emotions that you see in your kids, things like anger and fear. Those are all the downstairs brain's function. So they actually need to work together. The upstairs brain and the downstairs brain need to work together for your child to think and behave in a manner that's healthy and that's a joy to everybody around them, and also be healthy within themselves, right? So these two parts need to be integrated for them to do that. But it doesn't normally happen that way as well. We not in young children especially, we don't see them integrating these two parts, right? We don't see the upstairs brain having that control over that downstairs brain a lot of the times. And when that happens, we call it flipping their lids. So what is flipping their lids, right? It's when children throw a tantrum. It's when children shout and they yell and they're like they've lost control already, right? That's flipping their lids. It's because they have experienced anger, they've experienced fear, they have fear in their hearts, or if they're hungry or tired, that would cause the downstairs brain to flip the lid, and they can't access their upstairs brain anymore. Their thinking brain is out of the window. They flip their lids. They're no more accessing that already. Okay. So yeah, and I want to talk about a little bit about my thumb here, which is the amygdala. The amygdala is what is responsible for to keeping us safe, right? Just now we talked about how when we see a snake, you run away. So when we feel threat, when we sense threat, the amygdala fires up. It fires up and it causes us to not have our thinking brain on, and then we just run. We don't think, oh, am I running too slow? Am I running too fast? Will it get me? I'm just running already, right? I'm not thinking anymore. So when children experience those things, the amygdala fires up and they flip their lids, and especially in young children, the amygdala fires up very frequently, and that's why we see children misbehave. Young children misbehave quite a bit, and when they get older, they have that regulation and they don't misbehave as much, right? And also another thing that I want to talk about is that your upstairs brain or your child's upstairs brain is not fully developed until your mid-20s. So think about that. Some people are already parents in their mid-20s. Only then your upstairs brain is fully developed. So when they're children right now, they're toddlers, they're in primary school, even in secondary school, their thinking brain, their upstairs brain is not fully developed. It's like a house that's still under renovation. There's still a lot of planks on the floor, a lot of dust. That's their upstairs brain right now. It is not fully developed, not fully functioning very, very well yet. They're still developing that. And so if we're thinking about that, having that in mind, I want to pose a question to you. I want to ask you, do you need to adjust your expectations, knowing that their thinking brain, their upstairs brain is still under construction? Are we expecting too much when we expect a toddler to not cry when they're feeling big emotions? Are we expecting too much when we expect children to sit quietly for long periods of time? So in restaurants, when we bring them out and they run around, you just can't sit still, can you? Are we expecting too much from them? Maybe even in classrooms or even during Zoom classes, they tend to fidget a lot. They tend to walk around, play with the background, play with the filters, right? Why is that? Are we expecting too much from them? And lastly, are we expecting too much when we expect children to be obedient 100% of the time? So when we ask them to do things, right, and you expect them to listen to you all the time. Why can't you just listen to me? Why can't you just do what I say? If I asked you to stop jumping on the bed, jumping on the sofa, I've asked you to stop. Why have you not stopped? Right? So are we expecting too much? Do we need to adjust our expectation? Right? And so the next thing I want to talk about is how connection plays a big role in a child's life. So what connection actually is so connection is what we do to let our children feel seen and heard, to let them know that we understand them and we accept them, even though we don't agree with what they're doing, right? So even though they're misbehaving and they're telling you, I hate you, mama, I hate you, teacher, you're the worst mama ever, they actually still want that connection from you. They still want to be heard and seen and to be understood by you. And so what does connection do for us or for our children? Connection actually strengthens the connective fibers between the upstairs and the downstairs brain. So just now we talked about how they flip their lids, right? So if we connect with our children, the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain, they connect better, and that means that they're able to access that upstairs brain better. Okay, and the next thing connection does for our children is that it communicates to our kids that they will be loved no matter what they do. So even through tantrums, even through misbehavior, when we connect with them, even during those hard times, it communicates to them that I still love you. I don't agree with what you're doing. And maybe if you're hurting somebody, I need to hold some boundaries in place, but I'm still going to connect to you. I'm still going to let you feel seen and heard. Okay, so, and that brings us to something called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons is what all of us have in our brains. We have these mirror neurons to reflect what other people are feeling. So let me give you an example. Have you ever seen somebody yawn and you want to yawn yourself, or you've yawned yourself as well? Or if you see somebody eating a piece of scrumptious chocolate cake on TV and you feel hungry yourself, you salivate, right? That's your mirror neurons at work. And so how does mirror neurons have to do with misbehavior, right? So if our child has already flipped their lids and we shout at them, we're angry, what are their mirror neurons picking up? They're picking up our anger, they're picking up our frustration, and so they will continue that as well. They're more likely to be angry, they're more likely to be frustrated as well, and they can't access that upper part of their brain, the upstairs brain, right? But on the other hand, if they've flipped their lids and they're having a tantrum, they're shouting, yelling, but we come to them with calmness, what the mirror neurons are picking up and reflecting is your calmness, and most likely they will calm down even faster. So that's what the mirror neurons do in their brains, right? And that brings us to the kind of discipline strategies we're using. So if we're disciplining in a harsh and threatening way, like using spanking or scolding or timeouts, these discipline strategies will send a signal to our child's brain that they're being threatened, they're in danger. So what happens to them is they might have either of these three reactions. They might have the fight or flight or freeze mode, right? So if they sense threat from us while we're disciplining them and they go into fight mode, you might see them hitting, shouting, throwing things, or demanding, no, I want this, right? They're fighting. And some children, they go into flight mode. Flight meaning they run away, they flee, they procrastinate what you ask them to do, they avoid eye contact, right? And the last thing that children might do is they freeze. So that can look like zoning out. You know, they're not there anymore. The body is there, but the mind's like somewhere else. Maybe they're daydreaming, right? They're unresponsive because they're not listening to you anymore. You're scolding them. You're telling them, you know, you're not supposed to do this, but they're not anymore. They're not there anymore. They're not listening to you, and they're unable to process what you're saying. And so that's not what we want for our children. We want to offer you some helpful strategies to really help you when your child misbehaves. And that's where Justina comes in and she'll offer some practical strategies. Justina, you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, I just realized that. Yeah, thanks so much, Carmen. And I hope everybody feels like, does everybody feel like they understand the why behind misbehavior a little bit better? Because for me, I really found that it was a game changer when I started to really understand what was happening literally below the surface inside the brain when there were these challenging behaviors that were starting to come up. And I think what it really did is it allowed me to reframe misbehavior or any behavior as communication. Any behavior that we're observing is what our child is communicating to us. They're trying to tell us something. And so I could start to respond from a place of empathy and compassion rather than always from anger or out of fear myself. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect. We're all human. You know, just to go back to this slide, this mirror neuron slide, I really like it because you know, we're all human. We all lose our cool. And these mirror neurons, they work both ways. It's not just when we are able to reflect calm, then our child calms down, or when we're angry, we reflect it, and then our child, you know, it starts to escalate. But it's the other way around as well. Our mirror neurons are actually picking up what our child is sending out to us, right? So when our child is dysregulated, meaning when they flip their lids, they've lost control, they're angry, or they're really frustrated, our first reaction is usually to mirror that back, to also get angry, to also get frustrated. And that's just, it's just biological. It's just how we're wired. But the hope for us is that as adults, we've had a little bit more time for our brain to develop. So our house is complete. It's more complete, hopefully. And so we are better able to access our upstairs brain in order to kind of bring the situation back under control rather than us also flipping our lids with our child. So yeah, so I found the brain science part really helpful. So thank you so much, Carmen. And because we didn't just want to leave you with the theory of what's going on in your child's brain, because especially if you're a parent or you're a teacher, you know that in the day-to-day moments, it's great to know the theory, but what do you actually do with your child when they are just completely, they've gone mental, they've lost it, like what are you supposed to do? How does the theory help you? So we wanted you to be able to walk away with some tools that you can actually start to use immediately to help to navigate those challenging moments of misbehavior when they come up. So how should we respond to misbehavior? This is a mantra that we use to remind us of the big picture. And if you follow us on social media, you would have seen this. It's even in our bios, connection before correction. It's a really easy way to remember what we should be prioritizing in that moment, in that very heated moment when everybody's like full of big feelings, including ourselves. What is it that we want to keep our eyes on? What's the prize? The prize here is connection. Just like what Carmen was talking about, we are focusing on our relationship with our child and prioritizing that connection with them, even when they're acting out, even when they're doing something that we think is naughty. We prioritize that connection before we even think about correcting the behavior or managing the misbehavior. And when we do that, you'll find that being able to come back into that state of solving the problem happens a lot quicker than it would if we immediately jump into teaching mode or immediately jump into scolding or lecturing or just trying to fix that wrong behavior in the moment. The first thing that we do is to try to connect with our child. And so there are two ways that I wanted to talk about. The first is by communicating comfort. And this really focuses on what our nonverbal cues are communicating to our child. Remember when Carmen was saying that we want to come across as not as the threat, because when we discipline in that way, it sends our child into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And that's not helpful for them. It doesn't help them to access that upstairs brain again. So we want to be communicating comfort to them rather than threat. And the second tool that we want to talk about is Name It to Team It. And this also comes from Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson's book. And basically this talks about the verbal communication. If we are going to say something, one of the best things that we can say is to identify and help them to label the feeling that they are feeling in that moment. Because when our child is misbehaving, there is a feeling, or there are multiple feelings underlying the behavior. So I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. On the first point about communicating comfort, and actually for any kind of strategy for connecting with your child, we always want to be the person that they run towards rather than away from. So we want to be their safe place rather than for them to perceive us in the same way as they would a snake or a wild boar or a tiger. You know, we don't want them to be running away from us in that moment where they most need us to support them with their big feelings and also with the actions that are associated with those feelings. So communicating comfort. Before we even say anything, before we think about teaching, one of the best things that we can do for ourselves and our child is to focus on ourselves and figure out what exactly are our nonverbals communicating. Because as we all know, you can say 1,000,001 things, but if our body and our tone doesn't match what we're trying to communicate, the message falls flat. It doesn't work because there is a disconnect, right? A lot of times our nonverbals are actually a lot more powerful than the words that we actually use. And actually the other thing about our nonverbals is that sometimes in that moment of challenging behavior, like we were talking about those mirror neurons and how we also can get into a place of, like I just want to shout at you too, I'm so angry, or you know, you're making me so upset. Sometimes for us, it's actually hard for us to access that upstairs part of our brain, which is responsible for things like language, for things like, you know, logical and rational thought. So sometimes in the moment, thinking about the right thing to say is actually really difficult. So one of the things that we can do is just to focus on what is it that our nonverbals communicate before we think about the words that we're using. And these could be a number of things, right? So let's talk about eye contact. Are we able to make eye contact with our child? And what is that eye contact communicating? Are we like glaring daggers at them? Or are we looking at them with love and with compassion? And, you know, anything that we talk about, you really have to observe your child, and there is no one size fits all prescription as to what you do in the moment. Some children, they don't do very well with they don't want to have eye contact in that moment. Like they will look down, they just don't want to. So you don't have to force them to look at you, but you know, it's really about, okay, so what is the eye contact? If they are willing to make eye contact, what is it that we're communicating with our gaze? What is our facial expression communicating? Are our lips tight? Are we frowning? Are we sort of glaring at them? You know, what is it that our face is communicating? Gestures, how are we approaching them with our body? Are we pointing a finger in their face like that? Are we getting up close to them like that? Because that immediately feels very threatening, feels very aggressive. Are we actually raising our hand to smack them? Or are we, kind of trying to keep our body, like our posture, our gestures, calm and measured? In terms of our posture, are we towering over them? Because that again communicates quite threatening. It comes across as quite threatening. You imagine if you are a child and you're very short and you're gazing up at somebody's nostrils and they're kind of towering over you and shouting at you and kind of dominating you with their body. That feels very like a threat, and that can immediately push them into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. Our tone of voice, if we do start to say something, what is the tone that we're communicating it in? Sometimes we have the right words, sometimes we're saying it's okay for you to be angry, but then we say it's okay, you want to be angry, and that obviously doesn't jive with what we intended to communicate. And the timing of our communication with them. Are we trying to approach them during a time when they are ready to receive what we are trying to say or trying to teach? And more often than not, actually, usually, that during that moment of misbehavior, during a tantrum, that's not the time to be teaching anything, because they've already flipped their lid. Whatever you say is not going to be processed in that moment, because they literally cannot process it rationally at that point. So, sometimes when we try to reason with our child, like we say, well, I already told you, I already said that, if you don't eat your dinner, you don't get ice cream, and then you didn't eat your dinner, so you don't get ice cream, and your child is just like flailing around on the floor, I want ice cream. Reasoning with them at that point it doesn't work. It's not going to go anywhere. And just one, if you're going to just take one thing away from this session, I have one pro tip. If you do nothing else, do this the next time your child misbehaves or has a tantrum, or there are big feelings in the house. Drop your body down and get below their eye level. Remember how I was talking about posture? That can be sometimes the simplest way to communicate comfort to them, is to just drop your body low, get below their eye level, so that they immediately know that you are not a threat, that you are getting not just on their level, but even below their eye level, and you are not a threat, you are a safe space, and you're there with them in the moment. And the other thing that this does is it not just communicates comfort to your child, it actually helps us. Some of you might have heard of this thing called power poses. There was this lady who did a really viral TED talk about how, when you put your body into certain positions, it makes you feel more powerful. So this is almost the opposite of that. By dropping your body low and getting yourself below your child's eye level, it actually helps you to start to access a place of empathy within, because you're getting yourself away from being that domineering figure in their life to being in the same physical space with them. So if you take nothing else away from this, drop down low, get below their eye level, and see if that helps the next time. The next time there is challenging behavior. So that's one. The second one that I wanted to talk about was name it to tame it. So this was, like I said, a strategy that was developed by Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Bryson. And this is when you feel like you need to say something. And if you say nothing else, one of the best things that you can say is to name the feeling that you're observing. And it really depends, again, on your child, their age, in terms of how verbal they are. But even if your child is pre-verbal, they're not really talking very much yet, this can be very effective. In fact, the earlier you start, the better, because they already start to learn the different words for different feelings. And a lot of times, when we label a feeling, we tend to just name the few. We say angry, sad, mad, upset maybe, and that's about it. That's kind of where we ourselves will stop with the feelings. It actually really helps to offer a range of names for the feelings so that they start to actually identify the different feelings that come up, because there are so many different emotions, there are so many different feelings, and sometimes you can feel different feelings all at the same time. So you could be afraid, you could be nervous, you could be anxious, excited. All of these things are feelings, and they don't have to actually be restricted to that moment where you're trying to calm your child down. Naming feelings is also super useful to do in moments of calm when your child is happy. You can say, oh, it looks like you were so excited to see your friend today at school. It looks like you're getting a little bit nervous about going to school tomorrow. Yeah, so just offering them the different names for the feelings that they're feeling does a few things. One, it develops their emotional vocabulary, so it starts to help them to associate words with the feelings that are coming up, and it helps them to also be more aware of what's coming up in the moment. And over time, as they start to become more verbal, as they start to develop more and more of those connections with the upstairs brain, they will start to be able to communicate to you how they're feeling using those emotional vocabulary that you've been teaching them. So they can say things like, Mama, I'm feeling very nervous today because I haven't seen Gong Gong in a long time. They'll start to be able to do that. And how helpful is that for them to be able to tell you without you having to guess, right? It helps to build connection and trust. So again, like what Carmen was saying, it communicates to the child that we see and hear them, and we accept them even when they're behaving in a way that is inappropriate. We still love them. We're not shutting them out just because they're behaving in a certain way. We're helping to maintain that relationship with them. The other thing that naming the feelings does is that this again accesses that language part of our brain, that upstairs part of the brain. So by talking about feelings in this way, by naming it, we're actually helping them to slowly move the brain into problem-solving mode. Rather than us flipping the lids together, we're actually helping them to start to make the connection with the upstairs brain again, and then slowly be able to move into a problem-solving mode away from that initial big reaction. And perhaps the most important thing about this strategy is that it supports the ongoing development of our brain's connections. And this is really the long game, because all the things that we talk about in terms of working with children, they're all about the long game. Basically, over time, we want them to become emotionally healthy, resilient, secure, all of these things, but they don't happen overnight. They are all abilities that are acquired over time that we can support. And so this strategy helps to support that by really building those connections within the brain. So 2 strategies, communicate comfort and name it to tame it. And I'm just going to quickly sum up what we discussed today, and then we'll try to quickly jump into some of the questions. And I see we actually have a question from Elijah as well. So just to recap, in the first part of the session, when Carmen was sharing about the brain science, we learned a few things. One is that there is a why behind this behavior, and there is something that's actually happening within the brain that manifests in the behavior that you're observing. And we really need to remember that our child's brains are still developing, and they won't become fully developed until they're in their mid-20s, which is really, really, really late. Like that, they're not even considered children anymore. So your child's brain is still developing. There are different parts of the brain that are responsible for different things. And it's really crucial to know that the brain is still under construction. And that helps us to learn to manage our expectations also, to be developmentally appropriate to what children are actually capable of. So the brain is still under construction. 2, connection is key. So for all humans, we are all wired for connection, and especially your child. So whatever strategy that we employ in the moment when it comes to disciplining, we should prioritize the connection. So when we use harsh discipline, then that will trigger flight, fright, or freeze, which basically means that the connection is broken between us and the child, because now they just entered into another state of being. So whatever we're doing in the moment, let's keep the connection front and center. And then I spoke about two strategies that I hope will help. One, communicate comfort. So let's just be aware of what our nonverbal cues are communicating, and make sure that we're communicating safety rather than danger. So always be the one that they run towards rather than away from. And secondly, if you do have to say anything at all, one of the best things that we can say is just to name the feeling that we are observing. So try to identify and acknowledge all feelings. So all feelings are okay. There are no bad feelings. They're just feelings. We're just emotional people. We feel different things. There's nothing wrong with any feeling. So by identifying and acknowledging all feelings, it helps our children learn how to navigate their own emotions. So yeah, so that was our presentation. And now we're going to just try to quickly answer some questions. Elijah asked a question about how does one communicate authority to our child when their upstairs development is still in progress? Carmen, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, Elijah, thank you for your question. So how does one communicate authority to our child when the upstairs brain is still in progress? Yeah, I think a lot of us, even me, when I first got to know this approach of, being with children and disciplining children, I had this question as well. Like, how does my child know that I'm the boss? You need to listen to me. Then they will do what we ask them to do, ask them to go take their shower, eat their veggies, they need to know that I'm the father, I'm the authority figure, you need to listen to me. And so I think that's very cultural, and a lot of people do think that. I used to think that as well, but what I've noticed with the research that I've done, and also really being with children and practicing respectful parenting, right, is that what actually engages cooperation is that we go alongside them and we help them we help them feel seen and heard, just like what Justina is saying. And when their upstairs brain is down, that is working and they're accessing it, they're able to think through better, instead of thinking, oh, why must I listen to you? Why, right? Why must I listen to you just because you're older than me, just because you're my father? Yes, there needs to be certain respect, but respect comes from modeling, right? When we respect them and when we show them what respect actually looks like, feels like, and what cooperation actually looks like and feels like, we model them to our children, they will most likely follow suit as well. And just like what Justina said, it doesn't come overnight. It is built upon day by day. That positive experience with you respecting them and engaging that cooperation with them is what will really help them cooperate with you, instead of wanting them to be obedient just because we are their father. Yeah, I hope that helps. Justina, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I definitely resonated with everything that Carmen said. The other thing I just wanted to say is, from the perspective of a parent, yeah, it's really difficult because sometimes you just go, just listen to me lah, because I'm your father, or I'm your mother. And what I've learned through this process is that respect goes both ways. And just because we talk about respectful parenting doesn't mean permissive parenting. It doesn't mean that you're just letting your child get away with whatever because you're trying to be respectful of them. The respect goes both ways. So we're modeling respect to them, and we do expect respect in return. And one of the things that we didn't have time to cover today, because it's a whole topic on itself, is the topic of boundaries. So just because we respect and we want to engage, we want to maintain the connection and engagement in the moment, doesn't mean that we don't lay boundaries down, right? So for example, if your child is doing something that might hurt somebody, he's about to whack his little brother on the head, we physically step in and stop the behavior before it happens. Or if we don't catch it in time, we do lay a boundary and say that, I don't want you to hurt your baby brother. I don't want you to hit him. It's not about going, oh yeah, we're trying to be nicey about it, and that's not what that connection and engagement means. We do set firm boundaries, but out of a place of love and compassion. So hopefully, boundaries like do not play with the electric circuit and switch. Yeah, so this is a safety issue, right? And it's a boundary that you have to stick to in order to keep them safe. So if it was me, for example, I might say, I don't want you to go near the switch because it is dangerous. And if my child continues to move towards it and I can see that she's reaching out to touch it, I'll move over and gently but firmly move her away and say, I can see that you're about to touch it. I can't let you do that. I'm going to move you over here to keep you safe. So that's just like an example of how I would enforce a boundary in the moment. And keep in mind that that boundary will have to be enforced over and over again. It's not like one time they're going to listen. Doesn't work. You will have to keep reinforcing it. Okay. Thanks, Elijah. Zheng Shen, how do we deal with upstairs developing teenagers that has past trauma? Okay, we'll come back to that. Carmen, if you don't mind, maybe I can quickly address the questions that we got. Yeah, so we got a few questions from the registration. I know that we're just coming up to 11. I think Joyce has said that we can maybe keep the room open for another 15 minutes, but if you do need to leave, you've got a class to get to or whatever, that's okay, feel free to, but we'll just stay on for a little bit more to try to answer some of the questions that we received. So if you submitted a question in your registration form, do stick around, we're gonna try to answer it now. So I'll go first. There were two questions that I got. And the first was, my 4.5-year-old gets very frequent stomach aches. Is it from constant scolding? So I thought that this question was a really, it really resonated with me because I've had personal experience with a child that seemed to have experienced this. Of course, I don't know enough about the child or when the stomach aches are occurring. So the first thing I will say is obviously always seek medical advice, see your pediatrician if you really feel like there's something not right. If your child is constantly complaining about stomach aches and you see that you think there is a genuine physical concern, always go and seek medical advice. But I'm guessing from the tone of the question that the stomach aches, the complaining about stomach aches might be coming off the back of certain, like it might be coming up at certain times of the day, or you're noticing a pattern and you seem to think that it might be associated with the way that you're disciplining. So if you've ruled out a genuine medical concern and you think it might be stress related, there are some questions that I would ask. Is there a pattern that you're observing? Is your child complaining about stomach aches at certain times of the day? Does it seem to happen more frequently after you've said something or after your child's been doing something? When have you observed your child complaining of tummy aches? How are they talking about it? And just observing and just making a note of actually when are these things happening will tell you quite a lot about what it is that your child is trying to communicate to you. And I would also get very curious. So 4.5 years old, probably your child is quite verbal now, is able to communicate verbally. if I was going to ask questions, I would ask questions that were not judgmental, not like, why every day also you complain about stomach ache, something wrong with you, not that kind of question, more like, how does it feel, or can you show me where it hurts? And when I noticed that you've been talking about stomach aches quite a lot, when do you find that it hurts? Is it after your nap? Is it, whatever, like depending on what you've been observing? And even like role playing it out with toys, sometimes if you don't want to even have that direct like confrontation, it's not a confrontation, but like direct questioning about it, just role playing it out with toys sometimes can help. And based again on your observation, you can have a think about what might help to address, possibly if you feel like there are some stresses that are causing the stomach ache. How might you address it? And it's something that you could actually discuss with your child when both of you are in the right frame of mind. Like, oh, I've noticed that you've been having very frequent stomach aches and they seem to happen whenever. How do you think we can, how do you think I could help you, or how do you think we could solve it? Because I don't want you to always be having stomach aches. That must be really uncomfortable. So it's something that they might also want to get involved in problem solving. And the story I had in mind was a child that I was working with in school. We noticed that he was complaining about stomach aches for a period of maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Like very frequently, every other day, he would suddenly go, oh, I'm having a stomach ache. And then he would ask to sit out of maybe going to the playground or whatever. And the first time it happened, we always assume the best of, like, we don't assume that, oh, our child is trying to manipulate us or whatever. Like, we assume that there's genuinely something that's concerning, even if maybe there's not a genuine stomach ache, I don't know, but there must be something that's happening that is why they're communicating that they have this discomfort. So we allowed him to rest, and then we had follow-ups with the parents to just find out whether things were happening at home, like, and we were trying to figure out the cause and the solution together. And it turns out that he was having a bit of an unsettling time at home, and it could be that the stomach aches, whether he really felt stomach aches, or whether they were kind of another way to kind of communicate discomfort, were kind of a reaction to that unsettling situation at home. So over time, they actually resolved on their own. But just observe and get curious and possibly problem solve together are the 3 things I would say. Carmen, do you want to get to one of the questions that somebody asked?
Yes, so there was a question here saying that in the standpoint of teachers, how do we deal with misbehaving children online? And I think that's a very genuine question, because a lot of children are going online with school, right? And what I would say is, like what we talked about just now, all behavior is communication. And so we want to look at the why behind the misbehavior. Why are they misbehaving? Are they bored? Are they tired? We talked about how the upstairs brain is not developed yet until in the mid-20s. Is it because they can't sit for too long? Is it because are they afraid of being called on during Zoom and they don't want to be embarrassed, and that's why they're doing everything else to distract themselves, or just wanting to avoid being called on? So I would encourage you to look behind the behavior and see why is this happening. And then if you've sort of you figured out the why, you can address the why. So if it's that they're too young and they can't sit for such a long period of time, maybe have breaks in the middle. It's not weak for children to have breaks and be able to come back again and be refreshed and learn again. And we might have that feeling like, okay, we want to get through everything, children need to just toughen it up, just learn. But sometimes children need breaks, and we need breaks as well sometimes, right? So is it because they're tired, or is it that they don't want to be embarrassed? So if they don't want to be embarrassed, then maybe you could ask this person to maybe type in the comments. They don't need to answer verbally. So yeah, look at the why behind the behavior. And I'd say also having a routine also helps children. So like when they come in, they know exactly what's going to happen already. So they take out their books, they turn to this page, and we're going to do this, this, this. So having that consistent routine throughout your Zoom, right, will give children like a predictability, because children really thrive on routine and predictability. They know what's going to happen later, so that they feel a little bit more in control, and they don't feel anxious because, oh, I don't know what's going to happen later. I don't know how long it's going to, the class is going to be, what's going to happen next. I don't know. So really having that routine and preempting the children when they come in. So maybe before your class, you can say, so this is what's going to happen today. We're going to do this, 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 so that they know, okay, the flow is this. So after we do this, this is going to happen. So they actually know what's happening. They're in the know. So that would probably prevent some misbehavior as well. Yeah, so that's for my part. I hope it helps.
Yeah, thanks, Carmen. And then I had one more question here, also from one of the forums. How do I regulate the different behaviors that my son expresses, often without any known reason? Again, what I would say is to remember that self-regulation, or the ability for someone to regulate their own emotions and thereby control their behavior, is an ability that develops over time because of our brain that's under construction. So our priority in terms of regardless of whatever behavior is being observed or that is being shown by our kids, is always to help our children get regulated, rather than simply managing the behavior that we can see. It's always about, like Carmen says, to address the why, to address the underlying need. The most effective way that we can help our children to regulate is through co-regulation. So we didn't use this term during our talk, but it's essentially what Carmen was talking about, is that making that connection with our child. And it means, employing all of those mirror neurons, connecting our emotional brain to their emotional brain, and us getting calm and regulated so that we can help them to get calm and regulated and shift to more appropriate behavior once they are able to get into a regulated space. So that's the most effective way to help a child get regulated. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I have another question here. It says, can we address misbehavior only when the sibling is around? I'm assuming the question is asking, can we address misbehavior when the sibling is around? If I've misunderstood your question, do let me know. But I'd say if there's a sibling around, when we're disciplining children and addressing misbehavior, right, I think it's best to have some privacy when we address misbehavior. And it's also best anyways to address misbehavior when our children are calm. So when they're in a good mood, when they're feeling calm, that's the best time to address misbehavior, instead of when they're having that tantrum, when they're crying, their emotions are really big. That's not the time to address it anyways. That's the time to connect first, and then after, when they're calm, we address the behavior, we redirect the behavior. So if there's a sibling around, and sometimes they do get concerned, sometimes they're curious, hey, what's happening to my brother or sister, what's mom doing with them? So if they're curious that way, we could tell the sibling that, oh, brother or sister is having a hard time, and I'm just here to support brother or sister. We're okay. We're gonna do this. So they're just communicating to the sibling that your brother and sister is supported. They're okay. Yeah, and then only addressing the behavior in hopefully with some privacy, and then when they are more calm. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had one last question from Zhengshen, which I can just very quickly get to. How do we deal with upstairs developing teenagers that have past trauma? So this is a really big question. Yeah, I mean, when you say trauma, there are so many different types of traumatic incidences. It's very hard to unpack it here. What I would say is that, of course, again, going back to the foundation, it's always about building that relationship and trust and connection with even with a teenager. In fact, especially so with a teenager. So if that trauma is manifesting in, because as we all know, teenagers, they're also going through different things that are happening, and it might come out in certain types of behaviors, then we're always approaching them not from a place of shame or judgment, but from really wanting to understand and really wanting to connect with them person to person. And then when you're talking about trauma, I would definitely say that if there's a need, definitely do not hesitate to look for professional help, for therapy, to see a mental health professional to really help to unpack that trauma, because that can sometimes be, usually that's something that a lay person who's not trained in it might not be equipped to deal with, because we just do not know how to help them to access their deeper feelings behind the trauma. And it's something that could also be very triggering for us and very hard for us to approach in a way that's objective, especially if we are related to the teenager ourselves. If that's our child, it can help to have that objective professional to help and support the teenager. Carmen, I don't know whether you would add anything.
Yeah, I think I agree. I agree that if they need professional help from mental health professionals, don't hesitate to get that. But what we can do at home is also what we've talked about in our presentation as well. So to acknowledge their feelings, right? They're going through all of these things. We want to connect with them. We want to acknowledge their feelings. We want to name it. We want to name those feelings that they're having inside, help them feel seen and heard, and help them process it. So while they're figuring it out, and while maybe you're looking for help, what you can do are those things that we mentioned: to communicate comfort and also to acknowledge those big feelings. I'm sure it can be hard, but yeah, to acknowledge those feelings.
Yeah, and yeah, we have one more question from Hui Mui. Joyce, are we okay to continue a little bit, or?
Yes, sure. You can answer the question from Hui Mui.
Okay, thank you. So sometimes children's parents may have different values from us, and puts us teachers in a difficult position. For example, as teachers, we might encourage regular breaks after learning, but their parents may see that as being lazy or not trying hard enough. And these different values give a confusing message to the children. Is there a way to address this? Yeah, Carmen, maybe I can go first.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is hard as a teacher. I completely understand. It's really difficult, and it's really what informed also why we wanted to work with parents and with teachers, because children are being cared for by different people in different settings, and it can get confusing when there are different values that are being communicated. So specifically from the point of view as a teacher dealing with parents, what I would say is that as a parent myself, I appreciate transparency and communication from the teachers. So sometimes a parent might communicate something differently or contradictory to a child because they really do not know, like they're not aware of what it is that you're trying to do with their child. And just having a very open discussion with that particular parent can be super helpful. And coming from a place of yeah, like we're all on this child's team, we're all there trying to do what's best for them. And this is why I do things in the way that I do. So, maybe just talking them through, sorry. So this is what it's like working from home. All of you guys who are working from home as well. You can ask Nani to help you. Yeah, what was I saying? Yes, I was saying that with this particular parent, you could always start from a place of, in class, when we're doing things online, this is the flow of what I'll be covering. This is when I will take breaks. And the reason why I give the children breaks is because they need to be able to take breaks so that they can have a bit of a rest, and they'll be better able to receive the lesson with the break rather than going on. And just being really upfront with the parent, and I guess trusting that most parents also want what's best for their children. So if you can communicate from a place of, we're all on the same team, and I hope that you understand what I'm trying to do with your child, I think that most parents are receptive to it. Carmen, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's great. I 100% agree with what you said. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So thank you so much, guys, for all your questions and for just sticking around with us. And thank you so much for being with us during our webinar. If you want to see more from us, we are on social media, on Facebook and on Instagram, and you can also visit our website. So all of our latest work is up there. And you're welcome, Pui. If you have any other questions that you wanted to ask today, but we didn't have time to get to, please drop us a note at hello@raisewithwonder.com.my, or if you had any comments from today, we would love to hear from you. And one more point, we actually prepared like a little PDF for you, and it's just as a reminder of what we discussed today that we're hoping that you'll find helpful. So I think Joyce will actually send everybody out an email with an evaluation form, and we're also giving her a link to the PDF. So you can just download the PDF there, and it's just a little gift from us to you, and hopefully it helps. So thanks so much again, and hopefully we get to see you all at another session. And thank you so much, Joyce, for organizing this.
Yeah, okay, so all right, thank you, Ms. Carmen and Ms. Justina, for your valuable insight and on this webinar. So ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the talk, and it has been a great pleasure having all of you with us. We'd like to extend our sincere apologies for any inconveniences caused as well. Hope to see you all again. Thank you.